What's up, Clean Freaks? I'm Bobby Parker with Beyond Clean, and you're watching the Borescope Experts series, where we bring some Borescope subject matter experts to you to answer common everyday questions about how to implement Borescope technology in your sterile processing department or your scope room or wherever it is that it's needed. I've got Andy and Jenni here in studio with me today, and today we're talking about time management with Borescope inspection. It's no surprise or secret that when you implement a new Borescope in your department, one of the first objections you're going to face is, how are we going to have the time to do this? And so we're going to talk through, how do you grant that permission, if you will, for technicians to spend some time with instruments? Or maybe if your fear is at the opposite end of the spectrum of, how do we maybe constrain the time a little bit about how technicians spend time with their instruments? So I'm excited about diving into all of that with you all today. So Andy, why don't you kick us off here and talk through, what do you think are maybe some of those realistic timeframes for different types of inspections, or maybe even more broadly, how do you arrive at those kinds of timeframes?
Yeah. Well, obviously, this is not designed to be an added cost when possible. Cost being either dollars or time invested. But, time investment in a borescope inspection can widely vary. I think the two biggest things that are going to play into that are the device itself, and specifically the length of the lumen. Second thing being the complexity or potentially the condition of that lumen, right? So we might have a short lumen and it might be pristine. Something like a suction, that could be a very quick inspection. We're talking 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds. A longer lumen, or something where we're seeing some challenges or defects, which statistics show that we could certainly find that's going to add some additional time. I'm obviously still a firm believer that we're glad we're going to spend the time to catch that and hopefully drive some change off of that catch. But remember, the big thing focus here is these are things that we need to spend the time to catch these, and we're really looking for the majors initially early on. And so, Jenni, you got some great mindset around this. What are your thoughts?
Well, in real world experience, 8,000 endoscope, visual inspections a year. The data doesn't lie. It's really, in the real world, it can be quick and simple. After you have that initial just handling the device and how they do it, if your process is built right and it's where they need it, it really is quick and simple. I would say the area we spend the most time inspecting on is our GI endoscopes and some of our complex scopes, just because, again, the length of that channel, you have to, go in a couple of different directions. If there's different ports, some whatever, it can take time just to do it, but you're still looking at maybe 1 to 3 minutes, depending on how quick and effective you are. I think there's a risk sometimes of doing it too quickly. So like we've had to have some, again, we had a near miss with a stent in the end of a GI endoscope, and we almost missed it because it was in the distal tip. Well, they were looking at how they were inserting the borescope into the scope and not at the screen, and so they almost missed it, or missed it and then saw it again at the end. So it's about taking that time to make sure you're doing that full from tip to the end or wherever you're inserting it in. But real world, it's not going to add that much time. Where you can get sucked in a little bit is if you have a defect, and again, but then you're identifying the defect, you're doing your documentation, snapping that picture of it, and then it's there, it's done, you move on. You can assess what it is or get into some of that at the end. And then if you have to redo that manual clean and inspect it again, but again, that time that you're actually looking at that is not much. So I would say it's once or twice a month that somebody spends an extended amount of time on a scope, just because there's a weird discoloration or something that we haven't seen, or that, it's kind of throughout the scope and they're taking multiple pictures or images of that. But I would say the small channel, your small scopes and instruments, it is quick. Like like Andy said, it can be as quick as like 3 seconds to go to look in a suction or in a metrics tube. But if you're doing a shaver and you're getting all in there, and but it's part of your process too of that cleaning to make sure you've got all of that debris out of there. So it really depends on what you're seeing and what you're looking at and the type of the device. But it's just real world. I want to tell everybody it's really a non-issue.
Okay.
So I know there's a lot of stuff around it, but it's a non-issue.
For sure. So your challenge is if they're saying they don't have the time, you're saying you can find 60 seconds. If you're
Yes.
if you're that pressed for time, there are bigger issues at hand, I guess.
Yes.
So in your processes, how do you balance both that thorough inspection, tip to tip, distal all the way to proximal or the other way around, with operational efficiency and keeping things running smoothly? Andy, you've seen processes not only at Jenni's facility. Any thoughts or tips about how to balance those two things?
Yeah. So efficiencies are certainly quickly built with process improvements. So we got to remember just how we get there. You're not going to land on day one.
Right.
But a focus on the consistency is probably a smart place to start. Consistency, thoroughness is where you want to start, and then you're going to yield to better quality, but those efficiencies will pick up over time. I guess the one other piece that I would add would be, we have in the past seen more time taken on the actual organizing of the Borescope data on the back end, the organizing the pictures or, and sharing that with the stakeholders like we've talked about is where a lot of the time suck, I will call it, is where it goes.
Mm-hmm.
So look for ways to improve the efficiency on how you're capturing it, when you're capturing it. So that way, as we get done with the inspection, it's moved on to that next level and we have all the information that we want to with the Borescope report. That's kind of my little feed in, but Jenni, do you have some thoughts on that too?
Yeah, mine's from the point of like, how do you justify the time adds with operational efficiency or my productivity targets? We're all held to productivity targets and standards, but it's, again, if it's really a non-issue, again, for 60 seconds, maybe 33 minutes, in that thing. But, I kind of look at, again, back to that risk, what is the time if an instrument isn't clean? And what would that all impact? What's the time with that operational efficiency, or maybe that relationship between the CSD and the OR, it's clean, it's not clean, again, that can all impact that, especially in the OR, if you have a contaminated event, tearing down a case or resetting it up and then rapid turns and getting instruments up to them, or, there's risk there. I would say too, the time for the patients, and again, this kind of goes into our ROI, with if they have to cancel a procedure, if they had to wait, if they were under anesthesia a longer time because, again, there was a contaminated instrument or something. But if you set up those stations appropriately, the actual tack time, hands-on tack time by the technician, and to Andy's point, you have that handover process, as we've talked about in some of our, it's there, we've recleaned it, it's still there, it's got to go on to the next person, or there's damage, I pull it and I send it on. That doesn't impact the technician time and your reprocessing time through the department.
Sure. So it's all about flow, right? And with better tracking systems, better software, being able to associate that documentation with scopes and all of the back end processes can go a lot smoother than maybe they did with pictures and printing them out and stapling them to records and things like that. So there are definitely some things you can do. So for our listeners who are tuning in and maybe you just won them over, Jenni, they're like, all right, we probably do have 60 seconds to spend on it. What are your practical bits of advice? What are Jenni's top time-saving tips for technician triumph for Borescopes?
It's about where it's located, make sure it's part of their process, and then two, that give them permission and that they have that commitment to take the time and do that inspection. Start small. That's going to just foster that engagement and that use of it. My experience, once they see it and you can never unsee some of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Once it's there or what that looks like the thought of not having it, like if when we had only one Borescope or something and then it's down, or I have it down at one location, it's a panic if they can't look inside those scopes, because again, you can't unsee some of that stuff. So, process, make that time commitment, and just focus on the small things and just that standardization of that process for them. And the time, it really becomes a non-issue because so much time is gained at the end of it, and you have a safe patient-ready device.
Yeah, make it into a habit. Make them passionate about it with the pictures. Set it up in a process to where it's easy to do, and it should run. You mentioned not being able to unsee it. That image of that cut in half Andrews suction that the University of Michigan did way back in, I don't know, it was 2012, is seared into my mind. Like I can't help but wonder what's inside every tonsil suction or Andrews suction or whatever type of suction you have that's shaped that way, a yonker, just seared into my mind. So yeah, give technicians that experience, and it should flow pretty smoothly. Guys, I think that's going to wrap it for our discussion here on time management. And if you take one thing away from it, just a picture Jenni with her arm around your shoulder saying, it's okay, you do have the time, that it is worth it. And Andy coming along saying, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Like, set up a process, be consistent about it, and you'll find that it's maybe not as bad as you thought it was. Guys, this was a fun one. I hope it was helpful for our listeners. If listeners, you're out there watching this series and maybe you jumped in just in this one, know that we're doing a whole host of these videos. So go check out the playlist, listen to some of the other topics that Andy and Jenni are bringing some wisdom into for Borescope usage. And if you have a particular question about a topic that we haven't gotten to yet, or one that you need an answer to a little bit sooner, feel free to reach out to them directly. You'll find their contact information in the video description below. Next time we get together, we're going to talk about the team approach to borescopes. You're not on an island. There is a whole host of departments that can help you through this process. So we'll talk about who some of those key partners are in this relationship. But until we get there, next time I'll say what we always do here for you at Beyond Clean: keep fighting dirty.